Welcome, everyone. I was just texting you, Galo. Yeah, okay. That you need
Okay,
to accept. We're
we're
recording.
recording today's session because we are going to be sharing it with everybody who registered, and also it will be available on our YouTube channel. So don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube. So welcome everybody. Everybody who doesn't know about the concept. Hopefully this will be a very nurturing conversation, and also obviously to our friends and partners from way back. So in this convoluted world where we're living today with unprovoked wars and nature grabbing, the rise of the dangerous far right, that may well end up blowing up the world at some point, is I think a very urgent thing to look back at nature with humble eyes and listen. So this is what today's conversation is about. It's about learning from nature's intelligence and how that relates to analog forestry. So I'm not sure, Virginie, would you like to start sharing the slides? I don't see it.
Right.
We have 17 people today, but hopefully more will join. I wanted to see, here we go. We have a Spanish speaker coming in just in time because I was about to explain the interpretation.
Galo, can you open sharing, please, for everyone? Right, I
Yes,
think it's on.
now it's ready.
Yeah.
Alrighty. And there it is. Thank you. Can maybe just go to the second slide because okay, so just to remind everybody who does not speak English, I'm going to be saying this in Spanish for interpreters to know. Si no saben cómo activar la interpretación al español, por favor escríbanos un chat para poder ayudarles a conectar la interpretación, ¿sale? Um, that being said, for those who, for Galo and Ranil, if you are, please can speak slowly so that you can help our interpreters do their work. It will
Got
be
it.
greatly appreciated, and thank you in advance to our amazing interpreters. The next slide, please. So just to get to know each other, why don't we start putting up in the chat our names and where we're from and or the organization if we are from any and the country that we're connecting from. I think that will help us get acquainted and also add a an emoticon showing how you're feeling today. How do you come to today's conversation? And I want to thank also Cheers or Chesapeake Education Arts and Research Society, who is a partner to the IFN, because this conversation wouldn't have happened without their support. And this is in the framework of an analog forestry virtual course and internship. This would be the 2026 iteration. We're very thankful for this partnership, and hopefully we'll see more of this in the future. If for some reason you did not hear about it because maybe you hadn't connected to our different social media platforms, do so that you know more about them in the future. And next slide, please. And now we are getting warmer. We're going to start this conversation. We are 20 people now, so I think it's a good number. Welcome to those who joined before, and you probably didn't hear my name. My name is Eduardo. I'm from the IFN Secretariat, and today's conversation happens between three different parties, one being Ranil Senanayake, Galo Chiriboga, and you. Thank you for being here. I want to introduce first of all Dr. Senanayake. He's been around for a while with the IFN, so much so that he was the person who developed the methodology and the science around it, as well as having coined the term analog forestry. He is a systems ecologist, graduated from UC Davis, who designed already dozens of forests, analog forests, in many countries around the world for the last 4 decades. He also established what's known as the first analog forest in the late 80s in Sri Lanka called Belipola, which today is a training center and has also led many training sessions in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and continues to inspire and teach the methodology and ecology concepts through keynote talks such as today's and participation in related events. So welcome, Ranil. We know you may be a little jet lagged and it's the evening over there in Sri Lanka, but it's always good to see you.
Thanks.
This conversation will be facilitated by Galo. So I'm about to give up the mic and you won't hear me anymore. Galo Chiriboga, who is an Ecuadorian communicator and nature lover and analog forestry trainer. And he currently coordinates the Ecuadorian network of analog forestry, or REFA, since 2020. So he's currently focused on spreading the methodology by centering his efforts on environmental education and communication campaign. And last but not least, you, the audience, we thank you so much for having joined today. And thank you for those who submitted questions, because this will enrich our conversation, and we'll make our best effort to accommodate all these questions in different sections so that we can have them all. You will see that these questions appear through the course of the following 1.5 hours. So thank you again so much. And Galo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. And I'm so happy to be here today with you all. Before we enter in the conversation, I would like to introduce again Ranil. I think that he has made a lot of important things, like the originator and the concept and the science of analog forestry, because the topic of today is gonna be is about technology, and this is why the voice is so important today. We are entering in time where artificial intelligence, carbon markets, biodiversity credits, and ecological data are rapidly shaping the future of restoration. And I think Ranil's work reminds us that before we measure, model, or monetize a forest, we must first understand it is a living system. And so it is a really honor to have you here. So Ranil, thank you for being here. And before we begin, how are you today?
Uh,
What is your thoughts and feelings bringing in this conversation?
oh,
We are
cool.
doing well.
Actually, I
We are
just
doing
came
well.
back from Australia, and in Australia, there is the tip of the iceberg for all of us to look at, and that is the rising temperature. And the wheat crops themselves are being affected. Why? Because of the lethal temperature of chlorophyll and the cells that carry the chlorophyll. So when you pass 40 degrees, you are in danger zone. That is when your crops will fail, and the higher the temperature goes, beyond that, crops could completely fail. So we are heading into a world which is going to get so hot that we won't have food, and nobody is talking about it right now. And one of the things that we can offer the world is, with analog forestry, we have the potential of reducing the ambient temperature through evapotranspiration, because we require biomass to do it. And analog forestry does this for us. So this is what I've been finding out, and it's a crucial, critical thing that all of us now should be looking at, I believe.
Thank you for that, Ranil. So today we are opening this conversation that feels very timely because of what you have said. And I think analog forestry emerged long time before artificial intelligence and these carbon markets, biodiversity credits, and all this current language of nature-based solution. It was born from a very different question. How can we restore degraded landscapes, but learning from the structure, functions, and intelligence of natural forests? And so for decades, restoration has often been simplified into plant trees, counting carbon, or producing commodities. But forests are not just collector of trees. These are living systems made of relationship, fungi, roots, birds, insects, water, so on and so on. And also human care, no? Now that we are entering this new era of artificial intelligence can process enormous amounts of data, ecological credit markets, and all this trying to assess value to carbon and biodiversity. These tools may offer opportunities, but they are also carrying a lot of risks. That's can help us to understand complexity or to reduce living ecosystem into numbers, credits, or assets. So the first main question for you, Ranil, is why is analog forestry so important in this time frame and all this data uh, like coming so rapidly?
Well, I think analog forestry is important because of many things, but let's go back. One of the things that impressed me from my culture, from coming back to in Sri Lanka and India, is the statement that the Buddha makes about a forest. The Buddha says, a forest is an organism of great benevolence and kindness, an organism. That is, he identifies the forest as an ecosystem. It's not just a few trees, it's not just a few trees and biodiversity. All of it together creates the ecosystem. But that ecosystem has a character, benevolence, and he says, giving generously of its life processes, the ecosystem services. Now, this is something that in the digital world, we find it very difficult to comprehend because it takes a human being to start looking at what is a benign system. And then when we start looking at it more, what we realize is this, that in a digital world, when you look at a signal, what we do is we take a curve and we sample the curve. And then we give an approximation of that signal. So a lot of the nuances are lost. In an analog system, everything, like in music, everything, the entirety of it, all the nuances are transmitted. And that is why we should try to be analogous to nature, because nature has developed all the nuances. And quite often, we find that we can now work with certain species, understand their wider implication into a forest system spreading out to the biodiversity, etc. And then we start understanding a forest in a very different manner than if you just looked at it as a data set.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's gives me a lot of questions to go over, but is there any way that artificial intelligence never replace ecological restoration, like in this same thought?
Yes, because, as I said before, the digital signal will produce an approximation, while the analog sampling gives you fidelity of what is there. The existing data of a forest system, I mean, if you look at a forest system, it's a summary of all the species interaction. And as we understand more and more of the interactions, as that happens, that increase provokes a state change. We call it in forestry, in analog forestry, it's serial stage 1, serial stage 2, serial stage 3, as a forest matures. As a forest matures, at every point there's a state change. The state change is brought by all of the species interactions. So these things, then, by looking at the species, we can arrest the change or encourage the change, depending on management goals. So then we say that we look at this ecosystem because we understand that all ecosystems has a field of influence. It's called the ecological field around it. And that indicates the robustness of the field. and it's indicated by its biodiversity of that field. So as the biodiversity increases and the biomass increases, the field, that is the stretch of that, the ecological field extends further and further. That's why in analog forestry, when we look at, for instance, when we're talking about corridor formation, what you have to focus on the fields. You can take a patch and mature it, and then the ecological field grows around it as a circular thing. Now, if two fields touch, gene flow begins. So you don't have to think about straight lines full of trees and call it the corridor. That's not the only way to make corridor. We can also make corridors by understanding a forest ecosystem, and the ecological field that a forest creates. And this is what, when we go into artificial intelligence, this is what we lack always. They'll give us good management ideas, but the management ideas miss the nuances that all these interactions give us in an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So in that words, you think that analog forestry can be a translator between field observation and digital tools?
Absolutely, because analog forestry, the person who's designing, the designer creates his or her own interpretation that is unique. It's like a piece of art. It depends on the individual, and that is something that the machine cannot do.
Uh-huh.
And that's
Uh-huh.
what we offer to the world.
So we have the block 2 that is more about like carbon and biomass. Can we
Yeah.
focus on things like, for example, what are we measuring correctly when we only measure carbon in carbon credits?
Well, when we are looking at carbon credits, there are many things we are missing. One is the temporal difference between fossil carbon and biotic carbon. Biotic carbon is normally sequestered or tied up in biological systems for maybe 20, 30, at the best, 20,000 years, if you want to. Fossil carbon, on the other hand, is sequestered for millions of years, 20 million years. Now, we burn the fossil carbon, and this carbon that has been sequestered for 20 million years, we put it into a biological system to soak it up and say, it's all done. We've neutralized it. No. When that tree or plant dies, that is released back into the atmosphere. It doesn't go into the ground for 20 million years. So that is a big difference between fossil and biotic carbon. And the other question, when we're looking at carbon dioxide in itself, is we must understand that carbon dioxide, CO2, one atom of carbon, and we use two atoms of oxygen. That carbon is almost impossible to put back for 20 million years. But the oxygen that we use, we can put back in a month. So there is a possibility for us to work with these substances in a more meaningful and understanding way, and then utilize that in our design.
Mm-hmm. So you were like separating the concepts in carbon. Can we also like separate or distinguish the photosynthetic biomass, the respiring biomass, and the inert biomass? And why
Yes,
we have to
because
distinguish?
each part of the biomass, whether it be photosynthetic, whether it be respiring, or whether it be inert, contributes different inputs into the system. And when we are looking at outputs from the ecosystem services coming from the system, each area, that is, of biomass, photosynthetic biomass, has a different value and a different function. Respiring biomass has a different value and a different function. Non-active biomass which stores the carbon in soil, has a different function and different action. So we have to look at the forest or any ecosystem as an ecosystem and look at the components, the living components, and see how can we separate these living components, which is very easy to do, right? And that then gives us an idea of the ecosystem that we are building up. For instance, if we are in the early stage of cereal succession, we have annuals, shrubs, herbs, where the ratio of photosynthetic biomass is much higher than the respiring biomass. Why? The stems and roots are small compared to the large amount of leaves and green matter. As the plants grow, then there is and becomes more like a forest, there's much more respiring biomass, the timber and the roots, than the photosynthetic biomass. The relations change. And we as designers have to be very aware of this.
So in that line, can you explain us why will be better to think about photosynthetic biomass and not carbon credits, for example?
Okay, because photosynthetic biomass is the engine basically that fixes the carbon and releases oxygen and gives us the energy for survival. So that is the value. So photosynthetic biomass is the fundamental engine that creates life and creates a possibility for the sustainability of life on the planet. So as such, it is the most critical and most important area of biomass that we should be looking at, because that is the driver of all our systems. Then we look at the other functions. Respiring biomass holds the carbon for a long time, but it also does something else. It does chemical transformations. So we have different chemicals, different phytochemicals, different soil chemicals created at that point. And then finally, we should look at the inert biomass when it's all over, when the energy has been taken out of the molecules as much as life can. What's left over, like the humates and the fulminates in the soil, are the inert biomass, which also has a huge function in keeping the soil ecosystem alive and active.
This is for me a key element, and it's very important to tell these things into the markets and in the carbon markets and the biodiversity markets, because we are lacking, we're not understanding how life works in Earth now. So changing a little bit the questions and going into data sovereignty and power. What risk do you see in external companies collecting data from communities, territories to build models, credits, and sell credits, or control ecological information?
Well, the danger is that you exclude an essential part of the knowledge with that forest or that ecosystem, which are the traditional people who live in an area. So they have the acquired knowledge of working for years in that ecosystem. They understand that ecosystem, and they have a certain value set and cultural approaches to that ecosystem. So if we don't consider that, we have lost a huge amount of management information that could otherwise help us tremendously in our design into the future.
Mhm. In that line, how can you say, or can communities remain the owners, interpreters, and guardians of the ecological data?
There should be. And what we are saying is, if we look at an ecosystem and we look at the services of an ecosystem and we value the ecological services on an ecosystem, it's only good management that will keep the numbers high in terms of the ecological services. And good management are the traditional communities that lived around them and who harvested and husbanded them. That is the management system that we can take in and then codify it or formalize it into a wider application in that ecosystem. Users traditional info. I will certainly, I always encourage a synthesis of science and tradition. That is the only way forward, because tradition has formed over thousands of years of experience of the area. The good has been taken in and the bad has been thrown out because it doesn't work. That's a human experience. So having an experiential body of experiential knowledge, we have to then synthesize it with our modern scientific knowledge, and then hopefully we'll have a view or an approach that helps us to be more sensitive and sustainable in the management of these ecosystems, and include the participation of the communities who live there.
So are you saying that we always, or this new information and all these credits always have to include relationships between the community that lives there and the data they are taking?
Yeah, if there's
And
a
how do
community.
you do? And how do you do? For example, do you have an example that you can share?
Sure. If we start looking, for instance, in Sri Lanka, in the
Mhm.
traditions here, in the forest gardens here, there are certain traditions where farmers will plant certain plants or certain things because, in their experience, this is useful for their crops or for the rice paddies or whatever. There are certain plants like the jack tree and the mango tree that you do not plant close to houses and dwellings because of the experience they have had with lateral root movement and with a large biomass above their heads. So this is practical information that people have gathered and is encoded in the village. When people will tell you, oh, don't plant those here. They have these problems. Plant it there. That is the knowledge that people have. Now, if we encode that knowledge into our management systems become that much sharper.
Mhm. Okay, so we are going into the block 4, that is compensation, sacrificing zones, and ecological credits. So often a territory is destroyed with the promise of compensation through restoration elsewhere. From a
Mm-hmm.
system ecological perspective, it is truly possible to compensate for a destruction of an old forest, for example, or a river or a living ecosystem.
Well, the thing is, compensation is possible in a monetary sense, but what has to be done is restoration. But restoration anywhere out of the natural range of that particular ecosystem is not possible. So you can't look at a tropical forest and say, okay, we destroyed this tropical forest, but now we are going to move into a savanna and grow a little savanna woodland there. No, that doesn't work. It's not possible. There are two different ecosystems. You have to work within the ecosystem that you are trying to restore.
Mhm. So you're saying that the destruction of a pristine ecosystem that we are like trying to think that it's like there are some mature and non-touched ecosystems, but the value of those is not represented sometimes in the in any way. And so, what is your thoughts about in that?
Well, we've looked at that, and we find that there are many aspects that has not been utilized in placing value. For instance, what is the value of a forest or a piece of land that grows carbon in the soil? As the carbon content increases, what's the value? There are many. One is, of course, the biodiversity and the microorganisms that keep, fertility in the soil alive. Yes. Now, the other, when we are looking at it in terms of carbon in the soil, is that this carbon also, for every 1% increase in carbon concentration, you have 20,000 liters of water holding capacity. Now, that has a value. If you hold 20,000 liters more than you could do previously, that has a value, and we can put a real value on it. Similarly, we can look at a forest and look at the difference in temperature because of evapotranspiration between the forest and the area outside. And we find that there is maybe 4 to 5 degrees of cooling. Now, we know in an area, 1 acre for instance, how much it'll cost, how many British thermal units will we require to cool that area. That has a value because we do air conditioning, so we have those values with us. So it is in this way we have to look at a forest or any ecosystem and look at the functions of that ecosystem and look at it in terms of what is the commercial reality in the world today. And that is what we should be looking at when we are looking at placing value on the ecosystem services of any of the forests or any of the developed ecosystems that we work on.
So in that sense, can a ecological credit ever be ethical if it is used to justify destruction somewhere else?
No, ecological credit is ethical if you're examining an ecosystem and then the person who's guarding the ecosystem or protecting the ecosystem gets paid for doing that with the demonstrated values. That is ecological, looking at the value of ecosystem services. It doesn't give you any right to go anywhere else and cut anything else. Basically, it's a way that you look at an ecosystem and look at the values of the services it produces in relation to what the world is paying today for that exact service.
Yeah, so I think, for example, we are using these places as these sacrifices zones, and then we are continuously trying to give it up in other places with
Yep.
with these carbon credits. And yeah, for me, it's also like kind of impossible to relate.
Yeah, and we have to be careful with the carbon credits. It's okay to give carbon credits for tying up or locking up carbon, but you cannot justify having that as a reason to burn more fossil because the fossil can never be put away. The current argument today is we can put a tree to make up for the fossil that we are burning. It can never happen. It cannot, because as we said before, the ages, the temporal times of these two carbon pools are so totally different. So, but if we say, look, the world is now, we are getting choked, there's too much carbon dioxide, and we pay people for locking up the carbon without saying, hey, because we lock it up, we are giving the fossil industry a chance to burn some more carbon. That's the wrong thinking. The right thinking would be, yeah, we are paying you to lock up the carbon because you have a big problem in our atmosphere with the carbon. Stop. If you can do that, yes, there's value.
Mhm. So going further in this conversation and acknowledging everyone of your work from analog forestry, now you're trying to create this economic and social justice within these new credits that you're forming. Do you want to explain a little bit what should be the local communities play in this measuring and verifying restoration processes?
Yeah, well, there's two we can look at. One is to look at the production of the ecosystem itself. And that is going out, measuring the ecosystem, seeing how much biomass there is, what the percentage of for photosynthetic biomass, what the percentage of respiring biomass, what the percentage of inert biomass, what your increases, that gives you values. We can do that. And that is very effective. We are looking at that as looking at our ecosystems. But there's another important thing here. And the other important thing is this, that consider when we look at carbon dioxide, one atom of carbon is used
Jesus,
and
it's just too hot out here.
two atoms of oxygen is used. So if instead of looking at the carbon, if you look at the replacement of oxygen, which is easy, you can do that in a month. Then you create a whole new economy based on the generation of oxygen, which we are mining today at a prodigious rate. The global oxygen concentration is dropping right now because everybody's mining it, from the aircraft, the cars you drive, to the space rockets, to war. They are burning up the oxygen stocks of the planet. And the only way we can replace the oxygen stocks of the planet is with photosynthetic biomass. And that is where the real value is. And in terms of analog forestry, what we seek to do is we seek to create a three-dimensional increase in the photosynthetic biomass, because we go in there with our formula and we replace not only the trees, but the lianas and the vines and the shrub plants and the epiphytes. When we do that, we are increasing the amount of photosynthetic biomass within a given area, and that becomes an incredibly large producer of this primary production, which is the oxygen and clean water.
Mm-hmm. So I also see these like carbon credits are like in a large scale, and maybe like the producers and the small scale communities can never reach that. So what do you see in this new way of seeing in this new era of photosynthetic biomass? Think how can
Okay.
you like make a comparison between big, large scales carbon
Yeah.
productions with small scales community play in ecological gradient markets?
Okay. If we look at the large scale that we're looking at, we have to look at the production of ecosystem services from a system. And in that system, the production, all that they produce is gross, not net. That is, we measure the biomass of the area, we measure the species of the area, we measure the soil, etc., and we tell you what the estimated outputs are. On the other hand, there is the other approach that we are using, and that is to create an oxygen economy. Now, how do we do this? We do this now by giving a person a plant, a tree, and that person, farmer or rural person, whoever, looks after it for 4 years. And they're paid for 4 years for looking after it. And because we are paying them for looking after it, we sign a contract. That's a private contract. And in the contract, the farmer says, I recognize that I have private ownership of this tree. I own the roots, the leaves, and I have the option of selling what I want from the tree. And the farmer then says, under the contract, I give what comes out of the leaves of my tree to the investor. Now, the farmer has sold the oxygen that's coming out of the leaves of the tree. That's right, it's private property. Now, we can choose to put it in a bottle or not. And what we choose is to release it or deposit it in the global commons, because the global commons is what the whole world that we require to live. But just like putting $1 in a bank, you may not see that carbon or that oxygen again, but you have a receipt that you have contracted and privately produced and deposited this amount of oxygen in the global commons, and that receipt that you have is transactable. So then you create a new economy, and as the economy grows, then we can demand, for instance, if you're going out into space, do not take oxygen from the global commons. Take privately produced oxygen. Buy up the QR codes from the farmers who have been producing it. That way we move towards creating a new economy based upon the onsetting of oxygen into the global commons and recognizing what each person has contractually put into the global commons. So here we are using private property to put into the global commons as a public good, and that action is recorded, verified, monitored, and then the unit that records that, which is a certificate, just like a certificate for money, can be transacted, and that is the start of the new economy of oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And for that,
I
Analog Forestry has the largest, consider Analog Forestry. We create the largest three-dimensional structured photosynthetic biomass through our design. So we produce ecosystems that give you the largest amount of oxygen output.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that a small farmer and a big companies can also measure and be stewardships of this new oxygen economy that you're talking about.
Of course, because it doesn't matter whether you're a small farmer or a big corporation, the bottom line is you are trying to make profit from your agricultural enterprise. And if this can give profit, it doesn't matter if it's a small farmer or a large farmer or a group, this activity actually ensures us, our living beings, that our ecosystems are now being given the right amount of input so that we can be healthy and sustainable into the future. And that should be the most valuable goal of all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Ranil. So you take all my questions with that answer. But the thing is, like, what I want to understand more clearly is
Yes.
do these photosynthetic biomass
Mm-hmm.
is the same on each plant, or what
Yeah.
can you tell us about, like, a little bit more of the difference between plants and trees and
Okay.
so on?
Okay. It's like this. If you look at oxygen production on the planet, trees and plants on the land produce about 20% to 25% of the total oxygen production. 70 to 75% comes from the ocean, from algae and from diatoms. Now, there's a lesson here. What is that? Why does so much come out of the ocean? Because the algae and the diatoms do not have any solid respiring biomass. They're only produced, they don't have stems, they don't have roots, they don't have trunks. On land, a lot of the oxygen that's produced has to be used by the organism itself to maintain the other structures around it. Now, a clear example is like this. If you look at a tree, a small tree, in year one, the photosynthetic biomass compared to the respiring biomass, the photosynthetic biomass almost 90%, a small amount of respiring biomass, just the stem. The rest is all the leaves. As the plant grows, yes, the leaves increase, but so does the stem and the roots and the branches. And as a tree grows, what happens is that the oxygen that the tree is producing from the leaves starts getting used by the tree itself to keep its other structures alive. So in all trees, we come across a thing called a compensation point, and that is the tree grows, and as it grows taller and taller and bigger, it comes to a stage where it absorbing most of the oxygen it's producing to maintain itself.
Mhm.
So this is why we have to look at oxygen in terms of net production and gross production. If you just look at, if you count all the photosynthetic biomass of the leaves of the tree, that's gross production. You have to then look at the stems and the branches and look at the respiration and subtract that from the gross production to get your net. So this is the way that we must understand photosynthesis, photosynthetic biomass, and how we place value on it.
Mhm. That's impressive. I really think since I meet you in person 6 years ago, something like that, we were talking about these type
Mhm.
of things, and I'm so glad that we have this conversation. And I want to just open the floor a little bit. Just we have 10 minutes for if someone wants to add to this conversation
Mhm.
of these technological and nature-based solutions. So if anyone can raise his hand or write the question in the chat, or we can change and go to the public questions that the RIFA has organized in the when you are filling the form in the Zoom, you have the possibility
Mhm.
to make some questions.
Yeah.
So I open the floor a little bit if someone else wants to add to this conversation. Okay. We have some. Okay, we have some things. Okay, conversation formulas. 1 acre, 0.4 hectares. Oh, we are talking about an hectare approximately 2 hectares. We're talking about hectares. Let me see. If also Eduardo is there
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry about that. No, I don't think there are any new questions in the chat.
on the chat. Yeah, I was not looking at the chat, so I'm just
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
okay. So, okay, let's go forward into the public questions that they already have published and on the forum. So this is from Fatima. I think Fatima's here. What is the most important reason to preserve forests and land for you, Ranil?
The most important reason to preserve forests and land is basically to create the services, ecosystem services that we as human beings require to be sustainable into the future. The more we take out the photosynthetic biomass and the respiring biomass of the landscape, the more we reduce the largesse of nature, which has kept us alive all this time, and we have not recognized that as important, and we are allowing a certain slanted economic model which allows external negative externalities for processes to come in and then discount the real value that we should be looking at, and which is the real value is what can sustain us, our biological, physical beings and bodies into the future that we can perceive.
Mhm. In
As the
that
old,
line, oh, yeah.
as the old saying goes from the American Indians, Chief Seattle, when they find out that you cannot eat money, that is when humanity will find out the problems that we have created for ourselves. Because what we are creating now are processes that create money, money, money. But unfortunately, that process will take away the sustainability of water, of oxygen, and of food.
Mhm. So, we have another question for Agustin from Nigeria, and he asks, what ecological factors can hinder in an analog forest?
What ecology? Knowledge. Knowledge is the thing that can hinder the movement in analog forests because, for instance, if you haven't been very careful and screened all the material you're bringing in, you could bring in invasive exotics into your ecosystems and start upsetting it. So you have to do your screening. You have to look at the functions of these plants that we are going to be used. So design requires you to be very sensitive about the elements that you're putting in. Invasive exotics is one. The creation of disease is another, being vectors for disease. So these are things that we should be extremely careful about when we are implementing in the field.
Okay, we have another question from Alejandra Solano from Ecuador. He is asking, what is the formula of regeneration?
What is the formula for regeneration is the formula that you can measure your natural ecosystem as you can cut it, leave it alone and let it mature. You have your first serial stage, your second serial stage, your third serial stage, and your climax. Now we make formula for every single stage. The formula for regeneration is a formula that encapsulates serial succession in any given area. So you must look at the early serial, the formula demands that you look at the mid serial and the final stage. So that is how you have to look at any ecosystem, and the formula that you use, the fundamental formula is you must look at structure, function in relation to the serial stage that that particular ecosystem is. And if you build the serial stage into it, then your formula is complete.
We have another one that how can we increase biodiversity? This is from Rodriguez, Francisco Rodriguez. How can biodiversity be increased in a tropical forest?
Biodiversity is increased in a tropical forest by affording the trophic opportunities for all the plants and animals that enter into a forest. Now, one thing we should remember in terms of biodiversity is this. In any forest, trees account for 1% of the biodiversity of a forest, or less. 99% of the biodiversity of a forest is things other than trees. So that is where your design comes in. That is where you demonstrate your knowledge. Being able to be analogous to what a forest, none of us can look at the whole 99%, but we can look at certain elements that increase the biodiversity of a given area, and that is what our design should be about.
So he also asked, what is the physiognomic formula? I don't know if you want to add to that question.
Well, basically, the physiognomic formula is a way that we understand a forest, the structure of a forest, the architecture of a forest. Because you can look at a forest and say, yeah, a bunch of trees and creepers, and it's very thick. That's not a statement. The physiognomic formula makes a very structured architectural statement as to what you're seeing in front of you, and that is then your guide to what you have to produce that must be analogous to the, the formula. That is our
Mhm,
process.
mhm. So we have another question from Dietrich. I don't know if I'm saying right the name. When designing your systems, do you account for mycorrhizal fungi?
Of course you do. Now you have to, because every tree has its own root-associated microorganisms. So you must account for that. And certain trees, for instance, without their particular root associates, cannot survive. I'll give you a good example. And that is when I was working in Australia with land care, the Australian farms, for instance, the Australian land, the forest land, is not full of carbon. It's very sandy, it's very gravelly, and it has ants and arthropods as the dominant insects. You cross the field and you go to the farmer's field, because how we have built up the soil is thick, it's full of carbon, it's full of nutrient, earthworms, and there's hardly any of the native Australian forms there. When we started planting native trees back in the farm, they wouldn't grow. Some trees just wouldn't grow. They just grow for a little while and they won't grow up and they slowly die back. So we reckon, okay, what's missing here? What's missing are the root associated microorganisms. So we went out to the field, we collected just 100 grams of soil from under the parent trees of the species that we brought to the farm, and we brought that soil and did an inoculation around the roots of these species, and bingo, the trees start growing. Because in the farm, the soil is so good that the native organisms couldn't live there. And so you plant a native tree there, it doesn't grow very well at all. So this is how you have to manage.
Mhm. I like that because in the first for physiognomic formula and ecological evaluation,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have that much of fungi, but now we make the new approach of the manual of analog forestry. We have to keep an eye on the fungi that is here and there, no, like as a new.
Absolutely, absolutely. As I said, certain plants will not grow without their root associated fungi.
Mhm.
So if you want a good growth, sometimes you bring forest soil and then you inoculate the bags that you're growing your seedlings in, and you see a huge difference.
That's amazing. We have another question from Diego. How can we consider and represent ecological succession in a design map?
Oh, that's easy. In a design map, because it's management when we do a design map. In the design map, we have to decide, are we going to arrest growth at one point? For instance, if our design is for coffee and cocoa, for instance, and we create a nice analog system, but you cannot allow complete cover, because if the canopy gets completely covered over, your crops can't grow anymore. So
Mhm.
then you arrest it. So, and you state it. My management goal is to mature my forest until cereal stage 3, and then I arrest it because of my crops. That's a management choice you have to make.
Mhm. That's a good one. Now I see Fleur comes for her question. Sorry, how should we think about forestry in other than tropical and European context, for example, and Mediterranean climates?
Well, you have to look at what is the mature ecosystem of that given area. At the moment, we are working with some people up in Mongolia, in the deserts out there, trying to do analog forestry. We've been discussing their situations with them. It's very extreme. But even though it's an extreme climate, it still has a representation of a mature ecosystem. And we tell them, go and look at your mature ecosystem first. That is your goal. And then we start looking at the species that will fit in, that are analogous, that will give you the income or whatever other output you're looking for into the system. So it's the local ecosystem you must look at. When you say analog forestry, or you are being analogous to the most mature ecosystem in your own local area, not outside.
Mhm. I see that there are also another questions from what we have been discussing before. And so this is from Mary. When all tree seeds produce new trees, then their oxygen production becomes more valuable in oxygen production than the original tree. The original tree value changes to its ability to create new trees to produce usable oxygen. Is that something that we can be part of the calculations?
Yeah, all the oxygen is usable. Everything uses it. But the thing is it gross or is it net in our estimation? Right. What is the amount of net oxygen that's coming out to look at for the other things? Now, when a tree starts becoming into its, when it starts growing and it reaches a compensation point, when it's an adult, and it produces seedlings, yes, the seedlings will also produce much more net oxygen than their parent. But the parent is important. This is when we are doing analog forestry. Consider what's happening. The tree grows, is producing oxygen slowly. The net oxygen becomes less and less and less as it becomes more and more mature. But as it becomes more and more mature, that's why analog forestry is useful. We suddenly find that because we are doing analog forestry and not just forestry, we are interested in the epiphytes. We are interested in the vines. We are interested in the lianas. So when the tree is large, all the epiphytes are now producing net oxygen. Now, they're not a part of the tree, but they're there because they can only exist because there's a big tree. And so they produce the net oxygen because there is a substrate for them to operate on. So when you look at the oxygen production, in this case, in a forest, it's not just the tree itself. It is also the rest of the photosynthetic biomass that that tree supports.
Mm-hmm.
Because see, if you look at an epiphyte, there's hardly any roots and timber material. The epiphyte, almost 80% photosynthetic biomass. So the epiphytes is producing a huge amount of net. But they could never produce that unless they had a substrate, a large tree that has grown up. Now the tree is not producing net oxygen, but because it's a large tree, it's producing net oxygen to the ecosystem because of the epiphytes.
Mm. That's clue to have like all the types of plants that grows everywhere. Like we cannot take out the ferns, for example, and other epiphytes and from
Exactly.
the original forests.
That's why we do the formula.
Mm-hmm. So we have like more or less take all the questions, but we have one that we can like also go in that direction. That is from Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
And she is asking us, how can we address the short-term goal of feeding everyone now with analog forestry?
Well, the thing is, with the direction that we are going right now in temperature, global temperature, the production of food is going to be compromised. Why? Because the more open areas you have, the more exposed you are to temperatures above 40 degrees, which is a fact today. For food production, then, what do we have? We have to change our landscapes. We have to change our landscapes so that we have something analogous to the old forests that are surrounding our food producing areas, where we can keep the temperature at least 3 degrees lower than the ambient. If you do that, you have food and you can feed people. If you don't, you're going to go hungry.
But also like also responding to that question is also to biodiversity is also the answer, no? Like to
Of
have
course,
different plants,
of
other than
course,
the market plants.
of course, because not only the market plants alone won't drop the temperature. You got to have this whole complex around you to ensure the cooling factor, and this is a reality that we're going to face.
And also all these called punks, like non-traditional eatable plants that
Mm-hmm.
are everywhere, and sometimes they are in the like next to you when in your backyard, and you don't know that it's eatable or medicinal plant, and you just pass through and yeah, sometimes like eatable plants need a lot of caring because
Mm-hmm.
we have developed in that way. Can you talk about that? Like for example, tomatoes now they are so weak to be incorporated in analog forestry, for example.
Is not only that's the genes that we have chosen to isolate into agriculture. In the future, we have to breed plants to face a whole different agroecosystem. It's going to be hotter. Might be even more humid. So we have to create an internal ecosystem where the environment is benign and supportive of production. And that is where our designers come in. And that is where, as a designer, your skill comes in. And we have to be able to design the ecosystems into the future that is going to enable the plants that we are growing to produce. That's the bottom line. And the plants that we are growing will not produce beyond a certain temperature. That is a scientific fact. And we, for better or for worse, we are a group of people who now have the capacity to go to the world and say, hey, here's something you can use because we are going to get into a heat compromised future. This might help us and might help agriculture if we start thinking about changing the agricultural landscape to be responsive to the coming changes. Analog forestry is a technology that will help people do that.
I have a question for you from my heart, Ranil, and it's
Okay.
how do you see analog forestry in the coming years? How like in for example, for instance, 20 years? How do you see this movement growing, and how do you see the changes in all these like knowing of technology and all this network that is growing right now?
Well, the thing is, as we grow as a network, we have to share information with each other into the climate compromised future. We have to be ready, and we know what the future is going to be like. All of us in our various countries have knowledge now about how our local plants and our local condition, how they work. If
Mhm.
we have a network strong enough to exchange information with each other, then we can be dynamic and we can respond. Say in some area it's getting very dry and hot, in another area, people have been growing in a local area that's dry and hot and say, hey, we've been working in this area and this is what you do. This is the design you have to, with plants that you have to produce to respond to the changes that you are seeing. So if we have a network of people working with these different ecosystems and we are exchanging information with each other, then we can certainly help each other and help the world.
And can you tell us about a little bit more about the work that you have been doing for the last I think it's a decade now, and how do you see that coming also if we are talking about technology and nature in the same time?
Well, nature is what basically the natural systems is what's going to sustain us. Technology is a way of using science to look at nature and seeing how can we modify or play with or change nature in such a using our knowledge in technology so that we can facilitate the creation of ecosystems, natural ecosystems, nature, but designed with knowledge, with science, and designed with the knowledge of the markets, so that people can then plan for a future where there would be an economic potential for working in the field, while at the same time a recognition of the farmer who's working in the field and a value recognition, because we recognize that they are not only producing crops, they're also producing ecosystem services. And out of these, the critical ones are the creation of clean water, oxygen, etc.
Yeah, so can you explain a little bit, like, do you want to say something about the new carbon
Yes.
biodiversity credits, or
Well,
how are you managing to put them into the market, and how is that right
At the
now?
moment, at the moment, if you go to Aqualabs, which is the one that's looking at the looking at ecosystem services, there is a booklet that they have put out, and I have now advised them to release that book for everybody to use. It should be in the public domain, and it's now available. If you go into their site, you can ask for the booklet. It gives you the protocols on how to measure. When you go into the field, what do you do? How do you measure? How do you measure your soil? How do you measure the trees? How do you measure your biomass? How do you measure the temperature? It's all set out now. So then there is a protocol, and if that protocol becomes a universal protocol that, for instance, starts with our network, and the network people are using this to value the land, to value the output of their lands, now we are creating a whole movement with knowledge. So this is one that I'm working on, and I'm very clean, and I invite everybody to write in to Aqualabs and request the booklet on the protocols on how to measure. The other part of it is the oxygen economy. And that is, how can we create an economy based on measured, contracted oxygen that can actually give the rural population more value on their land. Because if you consider today in any farm, the value the farmer has is that little coffee beans or the coconuts or the wheat or the rice that they can sell into the marketplace. The rest of the farm has no value. But the rest of the farm, if it is properly designed, is producing an incredible amount of value into the global commons. That Robert Constanza and economists have valued the output of the ecosystem services at $170 trillion per annum. And it still has not been capitalized. This is about thrice the amount of the global GDP. There is the wealth to be made. And if we, with our approach, we are some of the leading people who can help to capitalize that huge amount of ecosystem services, the wealth there that has been identified already by the economists. And this is the direction I'd like us to move into.
Thank you so much. I put the link on the chat so people can see.
And the other one is greenwealth.earth.
Green wealth.
Greenwealth.earth. That is the oxygen economy. Aqualabs is looking at ecosystem services and the value of ecosystem services. Green Wealth looks at creating the oxygen economy.
Okay,
Green
greenwealth.com.
Wealth.
Are you
No, .earth.
.earth? Okay.
.earth.
I'm not finding it.
No,
Let me just.
greenwealth.earth. Let me look at it now myself.
Okay, I got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, good.
Let
There you
me share this in the screen. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Diego. So yeah, I we have 10 minutes left, and I want also to have some opinions, comments, anything from the crowd, because this was a space for everyone to say and ask questions for Ranil. So maybe do you have any other comments or questions that we have not touched today? Please raise your hand or just open the mic and maybe the camera so we can see you. I think people are not in a communications way right now, but I always have more questions for you, Ranil. So
go.
how is Belipula forest, and is this reaching to climax
It
or not
is.
yet?
Certain areas we are managing as arrested succession. Certain areas we're managing, that is, we are growing some tea, that is arrested. We don't let the complete cover come over because of the tea and the coffee, because that's the demonstrations we have in Belipola. So, but because Aqualabs has now come and measured the ecosystem services of Belipola, the 17 hectares of land in Belipola is producing close upon $2 million worth of ecosystem services every year. And this is what the whole world is producing, and we have not yet gone to capitalize. This is the wealth that's out there. So if this is the wealth that our farmers have. And that
Are you
is what
saying $2 million a year?
dollars. Yeah. Yes.
Per,
Go
how
to
do
the
you manage somehow?
well, go to Aqualabs and you'll see the process and you'll see the valuation. And that's why I said we got the booklet on how to value this, and everybody should get that. And I believe the IFAN should be getting into this and then getting the booklets and sending it out to our members and training our members.
So here's the site,
Yep.
and this is the Belipula Arboretum.
Yep. And that's how you value set. You go into the site and you check out the protocols.
Protocols. Let's see if I can find.
Arboretum, LCI, Aqualabs. This is how we, yeah.
Integrated ecological function, certain MRB evaluation. Okay. So yeah, we are gonna go and have a if you have the booklet you're talking about, we can like share in the with all the people that register, and that will be nice to have.
But what I suggest is that us, IFAN, we write to Aqualabs officially and say, we would like to promote what you're doing. Could we then have the protocols, the booklet or the protocols, and we will then republish it for our membership or whatever the members want after you got it.
Okay. Okay, I can do that for
Correct.
the
Great.
network.
Yeah. That'll help all our members also.
Perfect. So we are getting to the time. I am
Mm-hmm.
seeing some faces. I don't know if we have any question. Diego, are you turning the camera? So do you want to jump in a little bit? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ale, for the opportunity and very interesting the all the info that Ranil has shared. Thank you for all the knowledge and the work that you've been doing in all these method of redesigning our farmers and our countries. No, and well, my question will be regarding the going into the planting. Do you have any tips of how to for the new processes or new sites that we are planting, starting to
Mm-hmm.
plant? How do we consider all this theory in some small tips? Like, for example, in my question was taking into account the time of the ecological succession. When we design with the gap, we always design taking into account the mature forest, but this is going to take like 50 years at least to reach.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
how do we
That
plant taking
that's
this
why
process into account?
in your design, when you're placing your species in your design, you must also look at the canopy of the species, and that's in your database already. So if you then look at that and say, look, I'm getting too much shade here, can I get another species that is gives us more light coming through? That's the choice we have in our database. That is why analog forestry, in the end, is an art form. It is the individual person who's practicing it. It's their knowledge and their skill that produces the ecosystem that is robust.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that's the way to get into the world. I mean, if you're going to change the world, right, we'll have to get out there and create the models that other people can then look at, like Belipola, and say, oh, okay, they did it, I can do it too. That is where we have to get our system into.
Great. Yeah, having those examples is super motivating, really, for
It's
a better
really,
future.
for all of you, it's really important to go out there and create some example that you can show other people, hey, this is what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Good luck to everybody, man. Go for it. Change the world.
And we have Mari also that turn on the camera. Do you want to say something, Mari? No? Okay. So yeah, I will ask everyone to turn the cameras on so we can take the final picture, and then we can close our very nice
Bueno,
conversation today.
sí.
Okay. Smile, please. I'm taking
Ajá.
first picture, second picture, the
Okay.
last one. Okay.
Yay.
So thank you so much, Ranil, for your time. I
You-
know that you are tired for traveling from Australia, for having the time for talking to us and to put that in the global comments. So we are gonna put this video in the YouTube, and we hope we have more people like engaged in these topics. And this is so important for me, like to understand like the real value of forests and the real value of community-led
Sí.
uh, production. And so I am really honored to be here and to talk with you again. And yeah, I send a big hug for you and for everyone that is here and have
Thank you.
fine.
Thank you. Good luck all. I wish you well. Let's hope that, all of us can get together and make a change for the future so that the kids who are coming after us will have a little better chance than they're going to have today. So good luck, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Ranil. See you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.